Welcome to the Great Beer State podcast from the Michigan Brewers Guild. The Great Beer State is a weekly show sharing conversations and stories from the passionate people who contribute to our vibrant Michigan beer community. It is made up of a mix between full-length archived interviews from the Guild's first documentary book project, A Rising Tide, Stories from the Michigan Brewers Guild, and conversations recorded in the here and now. Each episode is kicked off with a conversational update from host Scott Graham, Executive Director of the Guild, and the Brewangelist Fred Biltman, author of A Rising Tide. Here's Scott and Fred. Welcome to Michigan's Great Beer State podcast. My name is Fred. I'm here with my good friend Scott Graham, Executive Director of the Michigan Brewers Guild. Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Fred. Nice to see you again this week. Looking forward to talking about city-built brewing and Edwin Collazo and everything else that might be going on around us.
Yeah, absolutely. We like to get started with updates. Speaking of that, it's been such a wild year. Updates have a lot of familiar ring because a lot of it is more of the same, getting through COVID and trying to find our way forward. But that said, I think it's important to just look around and see what's going on. So what have you noticed? What's new? What should people be paying attention to?
Well, COVID seems to be on the rise again. In northern lower Michigan, we're seeing some schools closing in reaction to a student or two testing positive. My own daughter's school has temporarily suspended after school things, which is exactly how it started in the spring before they closed the schools down. So, and of course, the universities, I think, are all doing mostly not in-person classes, which I just can't imagine the challenges that would bring. I'm sure some of it works fine, but there's a lot of it, it's hard to imagine how you can get through. So anyway, the number of positive cases is increasing again here in the end of October, early November. It's hard to know where it's going. I think it's on everybody's mind.
Yeah, and I think that, part of these conversations, especially early on, were kind of a way to help update people and let them know what's going on. And then another reason to kind of wake this up this year was we really wanted to document this as a very unique, unprecedented time. And so I think there's a moment to just bring that up again too, like all these updates. Here we are, we're going into fall, we're going into colder weather. It's been the strangest year we've ever seen. And now it just seems, it like you said, it's just pervasive. It's on everybody's mind of how are we going to get through winter. I think both breweries and some retail segments, and Edwin talks a little bit about it too. They found a way to an okay summer. Some thrived, some got to even, some lost less than they could have because we had great weather and they had outdoor seating and a lot of these adaptations. And now we're heading down straight into this new territory, and it's intense. And then we've stayed away from the broader political topics, but it's also a very politically heated situation. We're recording this just before the election, and I don't have a point or a question other than it's just interesting times, and interesting to put that down on the record that there's a lot of tension out there. And I guess I could wrap in saying, and this is echoing what came up with the upcoming interview, but it's been said by so many that these breweries are a place for community and a place for coming together, and I think a place for healing even. And that's shown through this pandemic. So that's something to be said, is that I'm grateful for all these places for community to connect.
Yeah, and there are certainly challenges, and I understand some folks are just not comfortable going out and making those connections right now. I think others are with reasonable precautions, and so I would encourage anybody to follow up on what they think is right for them. It was nice, again, Edwin brought up quite a number of things that are some of the topics that we've talked about. And one of them is, he had some of his regulars coming in 2-3 times a week saying, I'm here because I want you to be here later. They were consciously knew that there had to be some business flowing, and they were doing their best to share some of their purchasing with businesses that they thought were important to their life.
Yeah, so even if it's to go, um, beer or food and beer, support and connection, and I think it's even like he was saying, it was a point of conversation to come in and check in with one another. So I do think that our small independent breweries are, even in a to-go mode, even in a curbside mode, there's still this conversational connection that happens differently there than with other businesses or business types. So we'll see what happens. I certainly trust our members to be aware and to be. We've said this before, but a brewer is well trained in sanitation and understands microbiology, and they may not be doctors, but they've got good protocols to manage their environment for health and safety. So we've got that going for us as a community. It's another reason to put a vote of confidence in your local breweries.
Yeah, and from my own experience and talking with people and seeing what they do, I think they tend to err on the side of being even more over the top with their cleaning protocols and what they're cleaning and when they're cleaning and how they're dealing with situations. So I think restaurants and bars in general are good at it, and I think brewers are even better.
Yeah, I mean that's standard. That's a regular day in the fermentation hall. Is assertive over the top protection from contamination is just a regular day for a person in the cellar.
Yep, and really restaurants too. They're handling food that's going directly in people's bodies. They're regularly inspected. They have the health departments to look to for some consistent guidance, I guess, at least county by county. Um, so it makes me feel comfortable. I'm maybe not out as much as I would be normally, but I do feel pretty good about going out some.
Yeah, so seems like a good time to pivot from our little bit doomsday winter is coming message and pivot to give some shout outs to our Brewers Dozen. Like we said the last couple of weeks, we're in the second lap around our brewery members, going into little geographic pockets where you could feasibly visit a bunch of breweries in a given area. You want to tell us about this week's region and start us off?
Yeah, what we've got is I would call it the Royal Oak Ferndale area. Of course, it's part of the whole Metro Detroit area, and I suppose we go just outside of that a little bit to Birmingham, Troy, and Madison Heights. But we'll start off right downtown Royal Oak with one of our longtime brewery members, the Royal Oak Brewery.
Right on. Another longtime member is Lily's Brewery and Seafood Grill. And Bob was around in the brewing industry long before Lily's came into existence, which is a long time.
Yes, indeed. One of our newer members. And of course, we had a recent interview with Edward from River Rouge Brewing Company, but River Rouge Brewing Company is not in River Rouge. It's in Royal Oak. It's kind of right across the street from Royal Oak Brewery.
Yeah. And next up is Jolly Pumpkin Artisan Ales in Royal Oak, which is an extension of the original. We talked to Ron last week. So head on over to Jolly Pumpkin.
Yeah, and Jolly Pumpkin is actually, it's a reincarnation of what was Bastogne for quite a few years. And another central Royal Oak brewery is Roke Brewing Company.
And moving over to Ferndale, we've got Woodward Avenue Brewers. And I can remember some Brewers Guild meetings there in the way back machine.
Yeah, another longtime member, and another member on the newer side. Actually, a couple. The other ones in Ferndale are newer, starting with Brooks Brewing South, which is an extension of Brooks Brewing Company, which you might guess is a little further north.
All right. And we've got the Ferndale project in Ferndale.
Yeah, the Ferndale project is a second operation from Eastern Market Brewing Company. It's got its own identity. It's a different place, but it's the same folks. And that opened just right before things got shut down with COVID, or timed right in there. And then wrapping up Ferndale, we have Urban Rest Brewing Company, which is in the same general area.
And then heading over to Madison Heights, we've got Cadillac Straits Brewing Company.
Yeah, and then another couple of breweries just outside of the Royal Oak area are in Birmingham and Troy, and like to mention Griffin Claw Brewing Company, which is in Birmingham, and I'll let you wrap it up with the last one on the list.
Yep, we're heading to Granite City Food and Brewery in Troy. That makes this week's, Brewers Dozen over in the greater Royal Oak area. So give those breweries a visit, a shout, and your support. And that brings us right into introducing this week's guest, Edwin Collazo. His title is Chief Dreamer of City Built Brewing Company. They've been around since 2017. We talked to them in the here and now very recently. So got his take on all things, both the story of City Built, how he came into brewing and being a brewery owner, and then, of course, the pandemic and everything related to how they've adapted to that and what things look like now. Really enjoyed the conversation, and like we've said before, I felt like there were all sorts of little things that I didn't know about before that just drew me in and made me that much more interested in learning more about City Built.
Yeah, one of the things that I thought was kind of unique about Edwin's story is that he sort of bridges the, was a geeked out home brewer, or at least was a passionate home brewer, but he really brought a business sense. I think it felt to me like he had this dream of wanting to do more with his brewing and do something he had passion for, but he brought some business discipline, experience, and rationale to the whole project, and overlaid that on what initially was just planned as somebody living their dream of turning their brewing passion into a commercial venture.
Yeah, and it seemed like instead of saying, I wonder if I can blow this home brewing up, it was more like, why am I applying all of this business sense to things I'm not passionate about? What about this thing over here? So it kind of came even from the business world and then applied it. And wow, it seemed to be quite a mix with him and his business partners and team members that came on board. You can really hear the excitement and enthusiasm in his voice and demeanor, and I just love that about our community. We're fired up people that get other people fired up. I think it happens all the time, and he's a great example.
Yeah, and listening to him talk, maybe it was the time that I was listening to the interview, but it definitely made me thirsty and hungry.
Yeah, and I also love, we'll let him tell the listeners his stories, but talking about bringing in his Puerto Rican heritage and cuisine, and how that kind of intersects with his family history and where he's raised. It's just really compelling, natural, and I love when people bring themselves into their projects and their brands and do it so naturally and enthusiastically. It's what this is all about, is that he's put his heart and soul into it, and you can hear it, and he shares the whole scoop with us in the interview. So it was great fun talking with him.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's a good time to roll the interview.
Yeah, so let's head to Grand Rapids, Michigan. We're going to talk with Edwin Collazo, Chief Dreamer of City Built Brewing Company. Here's Edwin. Edwin, welcome to the Great Beer State podcast. Really happy to be talking with you today. How are you doing?
I'm well. I'm doing well, man. Just getting geared up for winter weather and trying to figure out how we're going to stay busy this winter outside.
Yeah. It's a trickier year than we've ever seen before, that's for sure. And it seems bizarre that all of a sudden we're facing cold weather. It seems like a lifetime's passed, but somehow or another, it went fast at the same time.
It did. We were very fortunate to have such a sunny, not so rainy summer. We maintained some outdoor space and it was busy every day, so it was good.
Yeah.
And so I'm sad to see it go, but actually I've heard we're supposed to get a snowy winter. And so I'm praying for a snowy winter, not just cold, but tons of snow.
There you go. So I'd love to head back in the time machine a little bit. And before we catch up to all this COVID 2020 craziness, I'd love to hear how you got started in general. Like, how did you end up in the world of beer or the world of Michigan beer? What's your origin story?
Well, I started home brewing with a neighbor who was our co-founder, David Petrulia. When I was still teaching, I was a prison teacher for a few years and kept busy learning how to make beer, mainly to take to a hangout like Memorial Day weekend. And so he helped me make a couple beers, Newcastle Clone and Moose Drool, like a brown beer, brown ale. Those are the two first beers I ever brewed. And then basically just kind of was paying attention to the culture of beer. I just found it interesting that people would mail beer across the country to get beer they couldn't get here. And I got involved in a group out of California called Hopheads. And everyone in the group, it seemed like, but me, was in the industry. They were writers, brewers, brewery owners. Mitch Steele was a hophead for a minute. And so like I got to be around some really cool, unique points of view as it pertained to beer and very different from Michigan. But I took all of that while I was, when we were planning City Built and tried to apply some of the things that I was seeing out west to what we were doing in terms of our build out and stuff like that. But I had an opportunity to get involved with City Built, and it just made sense because I had been chasing beer. I was a beer geek. I had been drinking craft beer since I was in college. It usually started with a couple craft beers and ended with a bunch of macro beer. And so that's kind of my line in, and it's been really good. I'm often asked if City Built was my dream, and it wasn't. It was someone else's dream, but for me, it was an opportunity to engage in our community, engage my background and my culture with our community. And so City Built's really just kind of the carrier for some of the things I'm trying to do.
Yeah, so I appreciate that distinction, and still there had to be a moment. Like, I wonder when, how long from hearing about the idea to morphing it into your own story, like what did that look like in terms of how long did you chew on the idea, or was it presented as an opportunity, or did you start attaching to it, and like, how did you consider changing your careers, I guess, is a simpler question.
Sure. Well, so changing careers would have been no anomaly for me. So I'd spent some time as a teacher for 8 years. I spent some time as a financial advisor for 7 years. And so it was about time for me to decide to do something different, I guess. But honestly, I'd spent some time writing a mission statement. Based on that mission statement, I realized that I wasn't necessarily fulfilled. I was good at what I did, but I wasn't fulfilled by it. I wasn't excited about it, by it. And so after doing it for 6 months and laying this mission statement over my business as an advisor, I made a ton of money, but I didn't really like how life was going. And so I started to look for businesses to buy. And so again, Dave was chasing City Built, and he had a partner who's still an active part of our investor group, who was leaving and was no longer interested in pursuing the brewery. And so I said, hey, man, for 7 years, all I've done is present ideas with my hand out, hoping someone would believe in an idea and give me money. And so I was like, I can do this. And so that was in late 2013. I had been helping those guys kind of meet people because they were friends all along. So I kind of knew not a lot about what they were doing, but I knew about the idea. I knew they were pursuing this brewery. I thought the name was really cool. And so I was like, I liked the beer. Dave made good beer as a home brewer. And so I decided that I can do this. It makes sense. I've been studying this culture for 4 or 5 years now. I was a beer geek. I loved brewing. I enjoyed those brew days. The cool thing is I used to spend 8 hours brewing beer, and I'd get like 5 or 10 gallons if I double batched. And now I spend 8 hours and it's like 350 gallons, and it's way better. But, so 2013, I decided to join the group, raised about $250,000 in about 30 days. And essentially I went to one of my favorite clients and just said, hey man, I want you to meet your new agent. I'm stepping outside of my professional, kind of stepping outside the lines by even asking about it. But I knew everything about him and I knew that it made sense. And so I was like, I'm willing to lose you as my best client to hopefully gain you as my first investor. And he's kind of perplexed by the whole thing. And I started to talk about some of the tax advantages, and he was in. And so and then after that, it became kind of digging into the initial business plan that I saw, and kind of realizing that it was kind of short-sighted. It was a good idea in 2007 or 2005. Was probably not a good idea, and based on what we saw in the world of beer in 2015 or 2013. And so we had to raise some more money. Original plan was a 3-barrel, kind of hole in the wall, peanuts on the floor, kind of sounds like Founders of old, no food. And so I was like, man, that brand of brewery is dying. We need to think differently. And if we do that, that's like a lot of other breweries. And so here's our opportunity to really stand out. And so 3 barrels became 10 barrels, 2,500 square feet became almost 7,000 square feet. No food became a very interesting and varied menu as it pertains to what it's varied from the typical Grand Rapids food. So we do Puerto Rican inspired food. Actually, recently we decided to call it Puerto Rican. And so we do Puerto food. And mainly because Puerto Ricans give me shit all the time. I don't know if I curse, sorry. Give me crap all the time. All right. So about the food not being Puerto Rican enough. And so I was like, fine, we're just Puerto Rican. And so once we decided to become the bigger thing, we realized $500,000 wasn't enough. So we went back and raised another $400,000. It took me a year. And then in the middle of our project, we ran into some issues where we just had a bad advisor. And that's really all I can say about that. But we had to go, and we sold shares we intended to keep so that we could finish, just because we had been kind of taken advantage of. And so in the end, we had to raise another, I think I raised $600,000 in 30 days.
Wow.
And so once we got close, it was way easier to ask people for money, because like they could walk into our space and see a bar. They could see that there were tanks in place. They could see that we were really close. But that from 2013, we were done raising money in late September 2016. And so we were supposed to open actually that September. And then we opened in May of 2017.
Wow. So that's almost 4 years from when you first started, attaching yourself to the project. So
certainly.
And it sounds like very much a shared vision as well. So even though the storyline may have started with somebody's initial idea, it sounds like all of you were shaping that vision together through those years of adapting to what you thought should happen with the changing landscape, and and creating this
Certainly.
new thing.
Just to give you some perspective, when we found this location, 820 Monroe, we were joining the Mitten as the only two West Side breweries. So now, Atwater, New Holland, Jolly Pumpkin, Harmony Hall, obviously the Mitten. I'd even put Creston in there. They opened up before us. And so now we were like the 7th, not the 2nd. And so it changed significantly. And so the entire time as we're raising money, all these breweries are opening up. And everyone's asking me, well, what do you think about saturation? Aren't you concerned about saturation? And I was like, no one says that about churches. No one says that about coffee shops. No one says that about, gas stations. So like, if we make good beer, if we appeal to a certain audience, we should be fine. However, here's what we're doing to be different. But none of them believed us at all.
Yeah.
And so they didn't see it. They felt like, I think they felt the momentum and the energy of what we were doing. But what's Puerto Rican food? What's super fragrant tea-like beer? What's which we don't even do that anymore. But there's things that they just had a hard time kind of wrapping their head around. And then they're just seeing breweries opening up left and right. And they're like, well, how do you fit? And so the whole time I was praying for every brewery. I'm like, please don't go out of business. Please don't go out of business. I'm trying to raise money for a brewery. And like, literally, we finally got there. And then you started to read about breweries going on. It was crazy.
Yeah.
And so.
Well, I'm with you too. I'm a huge advocate for believing that, that craft beer, that independent businesses are capable and deserving of larger part of the market share. Like when people say saturated, I say, you mean this is it? Like we're not allowed past 15%. Is that what you're saying? And so I totally agree. Yeah. And at the same time, it's an interesting inversion for people to consider that you're talking about success of people in your neighborhood as proof of concept, where the general consumer sees it as competition. And we're also changing drinkers. So like, I totally hear what you're saying, but to have it changing so rapidly in your neighborhood, not just the state, but rapid change right in your local community while you're in planning, just has to be crazy to sort of witness and keep your eye on the target.
Absolutely. Well, it just made me dig in. I'm like, just watch me go. I've had other people naysay and doubt me. And so it's just fuel.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about how the team shaped up, like who was doing what and kind of how did you guys find your rhythm and sort of go from idea to existence and execution?
Sure. So we started by finding a very talented brewer in Rob Qualls. It occurred to me that founders had picked up Adam Schmidt, who was a home brew shop manager at Siciliano's, and he's super talented. And here's a guy who spent every day talking about beer to brewers, talking about how malts fit, how hops fit. It just made sense. And so Rob was doing the same thing. And so we kind of took a chapter out of their book and pursued him. And he was excited to come aboard. And then taproom wise, Kurt Schmiege, he used to work at Founders. He then opened Perrin. And then I saw on Facebook that he wasn't working at Perrin. And so I immediately started chasing him and just kind of casting a vision for what we were trying. I mean, I had to talk him into it because he had opportunities to work at all these other bigger breweries, and so it was a lot of, hey man, you have an opportunity to build something big. We don't have a lot of dollars, so it's going to be more organic. We don't have the advantage of being this huge entity. And so, you're not going to make what you'd make somewhere else. Like I made it pretty plain. But also like, here's what we can do and here's what we want to be in our community. And so he hung on to that. And so, he's a huge part of our success. And then, in our kitchen, initially we had an individual, her name was Lizzie. She did a fantastic job learning our recipes because we taught her our food. We taught her our flavors and how to make those things fit. And then she grasped onto that and she did a good job of adding order to our kitchen, and understanding, because that's probably I'm the furthest away from understanding how that works. And I know more today than I did, in 2017, but it's still, I'm not a chef, and there's just nuances that I don't get. So they did a good job from the beginning. But at the time, she also had a sous chef named Chef Kyle, or Sue Kyle, who's now our head chef. So she's moved on. He stepped in, and he's done a great job of kind of applying his skill set. We used to call him the flavorologist because he just understood. And for example, he made a watermelon, candied watermelon tacos, and it tasted like gummy bears with fried pork. It was ridiculous. And so he's that guy. And so he's also behind, we have a pop-up kitchen that we do on the weekends called Le Grand Zombie, which is a Creole-inspired menu. He's 100% behind that idea and that food. And so we have really good leaders, and I'm happy to say we have every leader that we started with. And so Kurt started with us, Rob started with us, and Chef Kyle, he started with us. And so we tend to hold on to people, which is good. We do our best to love on people and make sure we give them opportunities to grow.
Yeah. And so can you kind of encapsulate what that idea at opening, once you got through there? I mean, you're talking about your vision, and you talked about how it was writing a mission that brought you to this change. So as you guys coalesced and the team came to be, what would you describe was the goal and what City Built was about collectively?
Well, initially the goal was to pay our bills so we could keep doing what we like doing. But honestly, the goal was to bring my culture, what's it feel like to be in a Puerto Rican's house, which is silly. However, it feels different. Like if you show up at my grandma's house and it's 2:30, well, that's not lunchtime. She'll have food in front of you in 10 minutes. I'm not sure how she does it, but she does a great job of just loving company and loving the people who, enter her home. And so our thought was to take that style of hospitality and show the city what that meant. Even now through non-table service, we talk about, well, how do we love it? How do we make this experience the best experience we can, even though we have a mask on, even though we're not really going to tables and serving anymore? What's that look like? And usually it's these little things that you don't think of, but man, if I can think of it before you do, like, you're going to appreciate that over time. And so that was our hope. But honestly, I live in a pretty Caucasian city, and sometimes people who look like me don't feel comfortable when they go out. And my thought was to provide a place where people who don't always fit in have a place where they fit in. And so we go out of our way when we see people, because I think sometimes they come into our space with a chip on their shoulder, ready to get bad service, ready to be ignored, or ready, whatever that is. And so our thought is, well, how do we kind of erode that wall? How do we get through that wall so that, and that was a really good experience. And I'd go back, Yeah. And so our hope is to create an experience, and the things that Kurt kept saying was, if we have good ambiance, if we have good service, if we have good product, we can't lose. And so that's been what we've done. And so from the beginning, we've always been known for our food. And over the last probably year, we spent a lot of time really kind of engaging on how we brew, but not just how we brew, but what we brew.
Yeah, I really like how you transitioned that. I mean, there's several really important ideas in what you just said, and that one, showcasing something sort of visceral and physical like the food and saying, here are the flavors of Puerto Rico, I hear you saying that's kind of a bridge to saying, I'm going to show you the some other ethos of my culture that I'm proud of, that I think is important, like hospitality, like making you feel welcome, and like having these overall thoughts of how to care for one another is something that you're also taking for, and you're showing it through the food. And then you go further, and it seems like, I like what you said about not everybody feels comfortable, not everybody that looks like you feels comfortable going out. And by by focusing on comfort, you're saying, you know, you don't have to look like you either. Like it's saying, can we be welcome to anybody, and can we use these virtues of hospitality to talk about being inviting and welcoming? I mean, I'm just paraphrasing, I think, because I wanted to highlight it and say that that's really important. And I think things like food and beverage can do that in a way that doesn't feel like you're telling people how, you're instead showing them what it feels like. So thank you for that, for sharing that.
Oh, for sure. Well, and like we don't get it right all the time, but that's our goal, you know. And it's like a muscle that you flex over time. You flex it enough, you get better at it. And so we're better today. We're 3.5 years ago.
Well, it also is part of, I think, what you're saying at the very beginning, like just making beer and having peanuts on the floor isn't enough. Like, I think that going back to the other point about saturation, I think there's always room for something new and something great, and that needs to be the experience, not just the mechanics. That beer alone is the bar, with the number of entries, with the increase in the number of players and the degree of quality, the bar does get raised, and so
certainly
there's room, but it needs to be something. It needs to be remarkable. And I hear you saying that that's into the whole hospitality and the feeling of engagement. It's not just whether the beer tastes good.
Absolutely. You know, I talk about Kurt a lot because he's kind of our North Star, and his attitude is in that, hey, we have to be excellent. You're not excellent in moments. You shoot for excellence in every moment, and you're going to hit it eventually, you know. And so he's set the standard. And the cool thing is to see that play out in every part of our business. We see our brewery. I mean, we talk openly about, well, how do we do this more efficiently? How do we do this better, right? How do we these little minute details in the beginning play a huge role in the end, not just, right? And so, like, we're figuring it out with our, we knew it as homebrewers, but to figure it out on the system is a little bit different than ever. And so we're seeing that play out. We've seen it play out in our kitchen with the zombie meals. I mean, we're a taco joint. Puerto Ricans don't eat tacos. We just, Grand Rapids loves tacos, and so we're happy to sell tacos. But like, that wasn't our thing, but we thought, well, here's an opportunity. Let's just be excellent at it. And so, and I'd love to tell you that's all me. We were very fortunate to have found really good people who bought into what we're trying to do, and who they kind of fan the flame.
Yeah, and I think you bring up the point, intention matters. We need to go beyond it, and we need to execute at a level that is inspired by our intention. But I do think that, we're all customers. We know what it feels like to be rooting for somebody because they care. And we'll withstand a miss if we're into it, if we got a rooting interest for them. And we're pretty hard on misses if we think it was out of not caring about us. And
absolutely.
So I think that's, partly what you're talking about. What's that?
Yeah. I said that's how people are take food service out of it. That's people kind of like that in general.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
exactly.
So that's a great point.
So caring matters, and then you got to let that drive your execution and do the best you can. And missing bravely once in a while sometimes even scores you some points if you were trying like hell but missed it.
Yeah. We've had a few beers that we've missed bravely.
So tell me a little bit about how that translates into beer. You mentioned earlier that kind of where you started changed from where you are now. Like,
sure.
What were your sort of creative, milestones or creative drive for the beer and the brewing?
Well, in the beginning, Dave was in the brewery and part of the brewing process, and so he was kind of dictating what we're doing in our brewery, and he had a vision for what that was. And he left towards the end of last year, it opened the door for us to kind of make some, small changes in our trajectory or in our process for beer. And so what I saw was there are no hype breweries in Grand Rapids, except for maybe Artisan. Actually, Artisan. And so there's these beer styles that I don't drink typically. However, I know that if I make them, they'll sell out relatively quickly. And so why were we ignoring that? And so let's do that more so that we can turn our taps more, and so we can turn our brew house more, so we can get better at our brew house. And so that's essentially the drive was, what isn't Grand Rapids providing? Grand Rapids is a town full of really great brewers with sometimes an old school approach to making beer, and they tend to be super balanced, which is what beer should be. I think they tend to be super clear, which this beer is. And so like we thought, well, no one's making pastry stouts all the time. No one's making hazy IPAs all the time. No one's making these over adjuncted sours, over fruited, over lactose sours all the time. And so that was really a door that I thought we could walk through and establish ourselves as just something different. And so that was our hope. We still make some of the other beers, but what we found, especially, which is wild because when COVID happened, and I know we're going to talk about that, but like it happened to happen right before we did our really big pastry stout release. And we were only open to sell beer that week, and I had literally no employees. Man. I went from 50 employees, right, to just that week anyways, me. We still kept people on payroll, a few people on payroll, because we wanted to add some stability. But that week it was just me selling beer, and I sold 10 grand of beer by myself, and I was like, with no overhead except for rent. Yeah, this is what we should be doing. And so we kept doing that, and through COVID, we were selling whole batches of beer in a week. And so we thought, yeah, this is probably the right thing for us. And then it just became, how do we get better at that? And so it's the cool thing is it's opened up these really fun conversations and relationships with breweries that we like who are good at that, And so we've gotten to connect to breweries in Florida and Colorado and out in California through the hotbeds, but also in Michigan on the other side of the state.
And so when you say being good at that, you're just talking about that being kind of over the top, adventurous, new style, saying you're going to be eager and ready to explore beyond the traditional boundaries, whatever that is. Because none of those styles are the same. They're just all sort of new adventures pushing the envelope of what the traditional style was. Is that fair?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and in that, we've kind of figured out that's more than just the beer. So if you're going to do those beers, you have to know how to market them, and you have to know how to sell them and where to sell them, and you have to figure out how to get people to come to your place, because they tend to be really expensive. And so I can't afford to distribute, 13-hour stout or 5-hour stout, because it costs us so much to make. So we have to figure out how people are going to buy it here. And so we've been trying to figure out how to get people to show up for 3 years, right? But now we're making beers that they have to come. If they don't come, we're going to eat, a lot of dollars.
Yeah.
And so, and it's more than just, what I've learned from being a brewery owner is it's not about brewing beer. It's not just about brewing beer. In fact, that's probably the least part of what I do. And all brewers would joke, well, you clean more than you brew, but it's so much, it's a lot of paperwork, but it's a lot of wrapping your head around, well, how do I market this? How do I make it appealing to people, not me? And so you can paint the prettiest picture, but if no one thinks it's pretty, then it doesn't matter what you think. And so how do you make it appealing to people? How do you make it pretty to people?
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about the name City Built and how that comes into play with all these other ideas that make you guys who you are?
Well, initially the idea was for the name of the brewery to be Freshwater Brewing. And so what we learned is that New Holland has a spirit called Freshwater, and likely they wouldn't care until we did a couple things, and then they might start caring. And so we thought, rather than have that argument down the road, to find a name that might not be that one. And so landed on City Built mainly because I think the thought was that people would connect with that name. City Built could be anywhere. City Built could be in Indianapolis, it could be in Detroit, it could be Traverse City, it could be everywhere. And then the idea of what cities are, well, they tend to be made up of a litany of different cultures. One of our taglines is where cultures collide. And so our thought is that cities are where cultures collide. And the most advanced or the most thriving cities tend to be cities that accept and are open to different cultures and are kind of basically cherry picking, like, let's take the best from that culture and let's engage that part of that culture because it helps the city this, X ways. And so that was basically it. And we thought it was a cool name.
Yeah, I like it.
Range.
I like it. I also like what you're saying that, cities are kind of where those, and the conversation about cultures colliding is that it's usually where you have both the, somebody that's hardcore, 100% authentic. We're doing this only the way grandma used to do it. And then right next door is somebody who's modifying and interpreting and moving things forward. And cities usually have all those versions there versus just one. And so that seems to make sense with what you're doing, both beer, food, and hospitality wise. Which also brings me back to your culture comments and the Puerto Rican cuisine and adaptation. So what has that been like for you to both put that out in a city that's not known for that heritage, and also, like, what's been your family's response in terms of seeing that become part of your business?
Well, I'm proud because we got people's attention, and in the same sentence as City Built, they're saying, hey, it's this Puerto Rican inspired, or this Puerto Rican, tweaked brewery. And so that's cool because I don't know that people still say things like south of the border, which Puerto Rico is not. Most recently, someone said immigrated from, so people don't quite understand the connect. And I don't blame them. You don't know until you know. And so, no, they didn't immigrate. They just moved because Puerto Rico is a commonwealth. And so, right. It's actually in the border. And so that conversation has been good. Puerto Rico, early on in our, when we were open, got hit by a hurricane, which my family was affected. I had conversations where I was sending batteries and fans and things like that to family because they didn't, because they needed it. And so we raised $5,000 for that. And so someone came in and we raised $5,000, but half of it was one person who came in. He's like, I had no clue. Literally absolutely no clue. This was not on my radar. I learned because of you. And so that was really cool. Now, I've also bastardized our food because, again, we don't eat tacos. We don't serve tortillas, at the table typically. However, I'm not from Puerto Rico. I'm from Ohio. And what I learned through this, from having City Built, or what was brought to my attention by my mom, as I was giving my spiel at a table about what City Built is and what our food is, and we don't have tacos, but we have tortillas on the table, and you rip it, and it's kind of a visceral, the whole thing. And my mom's sitting there shaking her head. It completely screwed up my spiel. And I was like, sorry, I got to excuse myself. And I'm like, why are you shaking your head? And she's like, Puerto Ricans don't have tortillas on the table. I was like, what are you talking about? Yeah, we did. She's like, you're from Ohio.
We had tortillas on the table.
Well, because my family started to marry into other cultures. And as they started to marry into other cultures in an attempt to be inclusive, an attempt to, kind of put your arms around this new or different culture, their food was there too. And so that was my experience, was this group of people who were hands wide open, willing to accept a different culture and then serve their food. And so my family started to marry the Mexican families. They started to marry the Cuban families. They started, so like as that happened, my food experience changed a little bit. And so that's what City Build is like this kind of melting pot, Heinz 57 of cultures.
Yeah, that's really a cool part of the story. And I think, I just think it's interesting to think about too, and including that Puerto Rico is really confusing for people. When I was back at New Holland, we took a trip there, 4 of us, and I felt I knew a little bit, but like it was an interesting moment to just realize what you don't know and be like, I'm confused by this, and there's nothing quite like a trip to start, I don't know, making you aware. Like awareness is a powerful thing. It just makes you ask better questions and slow your roll a little bit. And that was really important for me. And cuisine wise, when you talk about how things have varied in your family, it's also like the agriculture of Puerto Rico is crazy. Like you're not going to have access to do that all the way you want to do it in Grand Rapids. I mean, they have their growing cycle. I was astounded standing there with the chef looking at this garden they were cooking from. And it was like, for a Midwesterner, it was like, there's 12 months of growing in this plot in front of me. Like they had pumpkins next to summer fruits. And I'm just like, I don't understand this. So I think when you're bringing that to the upper Midwest, you're going to adapt. And your family was probably doing that before you knew, what was what, but then also to take that to a restaurant, unless you're flying foods in, you're going to have adaptation. And that's both cultural and agricultural.
You asked what my family thinks. And if I get one more Facebook message from a cousin asking me to tell them about my Puerto Rican tacos with a laffy, like I was like, which I mentioned I was going out of town tomorrow. I'm going to hang out with cousins in the woods to celebrate one of our days. And so, but they're engaged in what I'm doing, which is really cool. And they're engaged enough to see, man, I'm flexing what we did as kids. Like I'm flexing what we did to make it fit Grand Rapids. Because why are you doing that? I'm like, well, I don't think they can. I don't think that the masses of Grand Rapids can handle all the things that we eat. Especially to come into a restaurant and pay for it and find out it's whatever it is. That's what it looks like. It's not all pretty, but it's all good.
Yeah.
And so but it's been fun.
Well, I think at least in my family, I come from a big family. There's, one of the ways we show love is giving each other grief. So if you're getting teased, you're probably pretty close to, you're onto something.
It's true.
So, you were talking about, I think it's a good time to kind of lean into the current day. And I was just thinking about the age of your brewery and, being, the idea has been around for a while, but being a few years into it and just getting into your stride, and then a global pandemic hits and disrupts business like nobody's ever seen, including the 20-year businesses. So that kind of leads me to the first of what I've been calling the Great Beer State Last Call questions, which is the pandemic question is, how has COVID-19 and all the related stuff and regulations, how's that affected your business as well as your outlook looking ahead?
Sure. So you said it slowed our roll. So just for perspective, our first quarter of 2020, so March 11, we kind of figured that we were going to get closed, but we were open. And then March 13, we're closed. We were $30,000 away from having our best quarter ever. And so we were just trying to kind of come into it. And we had 2 weeks in the quarter. So I was like, we probably would have beat our best quarter by like 70 or 80 grand. But COVID happened and we had to close. And so I guess as I look back one, we had 50 employees. We dropped to about 5. I wasn't paying myself, but I kind of treated myself as a volunteer during that time. But we learned a lot of lessons. We don't need to operate with 50 people. That was one lesson. We changed our service model from table service to counter service. That helped us. I think the changes that we made in how we were, what we were brewing, that also was a big, I think, part of our kind of bolstering lower sales. Like we used to distribute 50% of what we made. We don't distribute anything now. We're about to start again, but we were selling everything that we were making here. We got to see how generous and kind people were, and people would say things like, I'm here on purpose because at the end of this, I hope to keep coming here. And so we had a few people that they came 3 days a week. And I could always, as soon as I saw the order, I knew who it was, and so they ordered the same thing 3 days a week, which is crazy. But also it made me think, all right, so people are rooting for us. And so that's kind of wind in your sails when people want you to be successful. Just as much as someone who's working against me gives me impetus to be better, so does knowing that someone roots for you, right? And if they want me to win, well, I better win because they want me to win. And so, those conversations were really cool. But now, the city the city of Grand Rapids did well to kind of rally around the businesses that are downtown. And so they were pretty quick to provide outdoor seating areas, not just the opportunity to have them, but they actually put tables and chairs and umbrellas there. That was huge. I just wrote a letter to my investor group kind of sharing how the summer went and some of the things that we're preparing for as we move into the winter. But one of those things is on any given evening, there are 18 tables outside, and they'd all be full. And so earlier we talked about how great the weather was this summer. Well, if it rained this summer, we wouldn't have done near as well because we had tap room with 50 people in it, and then we had 18 tables of people outside, and our hours decreased. We went from 7 days a week, open all the hours, to 6 days a week, and we're only open from 3 to 8 during the week, and basically the weekends are 12 to 10. And so we just kind of took a look as when do we make money? Let's be open when we make money, and so we can cut our labor as much as we can. And so our kitchen went, on any given day, we'd have 12 people in our kitchen. Now we never have more than 5, sometimes only 4. And so we started to look at our business and when we can win, how do we win big? And when we lose, how do we minimize the bleeding of a bad day, of a slow day, or whatever it is? And so it's just forced us to really pay attention to how our space flows and then match that flow with the appropriate amount of labor, the appropriate menu. Our menu is much smaller than what it was. I wanted to be a brewery, and we were really a restaurant, and now we're a brewery again because we minimized that food and increased what we sell in terms of beer in our space. So that's been good. People talk about what 2020 has been and tend to have a pretty negative outlook, and it hasn't been easy, but I wouldn't call it bad. I think our sales aren't close to what they were. However, there's a lot of little highlights within our year that we can lean on. And through this, through all of this, we still kept loving on people. We still kept loving our staff. We supported our staff when we could. And so there was a lot of opportunities in 2020 to definitely be down and negative and maybe even sit down. But we took it as an opportunity to be able to be a little bullish. And so that's what we've been doing.
Yeah, that's great. And it sounds like it's very formative and strengthening for your team and community, which is powerful stuff and not easy to do.
Certainly. Yeah.
Easy is overrated, I guess.
Yeah.
The next question is, the more you know, what beer style do you feel most connected to, and what do you wish more people knew about it?
I read that question. I'm not sure how to answer that question. So what beer style am I most connected to? Probably West Coast IPAs. I think people know all about West Coast IPAs, but they're too clear and too crisp. I don't know if people like juicy and hazy now. And me too, but I can only do one of those. And so I think what people drink is fine. I don't know. I like really nice, hoppy, bitter IPAs. I think they're refreshing. I've been a hophead for a lot of years. There was a moment while I was raising money where I didn't like IPAs for a minute, and I thought, actually, my biggest fear was I'd become celiac while I was raising money to become a brewery owner. And then the second one was, what if I don't like IPAs anymore? And it just was like, I don't know. I went through a phase in my palate where I just couldn't, like, there was no IPA I liked. It was weird. And so I drank a lot of stouts. But, yeah, we're doing our best to be relevant while also making beer that I like to drink while I'm sitting in the tap room. I don't know if that answers your question, but
yeah, it's close enough.
all right.
What about your ideal home bar? So I like to talk about what your home bar setup looks like, and any suggestions, since people are spending more time serving and enjoying beer at home.
Sure. So my home bar kind of got torn apart when I opened City Built. We needed a freezer, and so I took my my keg cooler and gave it to the kitchen so they could use it as a freezer. So like all of my things have kind of gotten parceled out in the City Built, and this is where I spend most of my time. So, however, when I had it, I basically set up a system where I could put, and I homebrewed, so I could put kegs or corny kegs on a tap system, and I had gas, and I had a way to keep it cold, and it was super easy to just pull a handle and grab a beer. The downside was I never knew how many beers I had, because if I walked by the bar to and from the kitchen, half a beer, 3/4 of a beer, 1/4 of a beer, I would just fill it up because I saved myself a trip, and so, so my bar didn't have it. It was set aside, but if I could build the bar that I wanted, it certainly would be able to have kegs in a cooler where I could pull a handle with gas attached. It would certainly have a sink next to it, and then probably a few bottles of whiskey next to that. That would be my perfect home bar.
There you go. Words of wisdom. And you're not the first guest to talk about, my home bar has kind of become this brewery. So, one advice is the ideal home bar is to open a brewery, and you'll have everything you need.
For sure.
Love and hate, you kind of hit on some of this before, but what are current trends that you love? What are some that you might hate? And then how are they reflected or not at City Built?
I think it's people's attitudes about beer. I think it's funny how people take such a strict line against any style. Like, I just won't drink that. And I just think it's wild to turn yourself off to without trying, a food, a relationship, or, a friend or someone to talk to. Like, why draw that? That's a weird line to draw. Like, this is my hill. I'm not going to cross this line for any style. And so the reality is right now people like super over adjuncted, super sweet beer, and I think it has its place, but I can't at my age spend a lot of time drinking it because I'd be 400 pounds. I just spend too much time in a brewery in general to drink all that. It's good 4 ounces at a time for me, but I also respect that there's an opportunity to give that to people because they look for it and are looking for the next opportunity to try the next new one. And so this idea of having to have new beer every month serves us because we're small. We don't have a huge brew. I mean, we have a 10-barrel brew house, but it was easy during COVID to pivot, right? Because we're small. And so it's fun to make the styles and kind of get goofy with it. We're planning a party for February right now around Mardi Gras, and there's a weird beer that we're going to make for it. And all I can say is pastry saison, which is goofy. I'm pretty sure there's not a category for that, but we thought, well, let's do this fun thing. Let's wrap it around a culture, Mardi Gras, the food, and make it match a dish, you know. That way, if it sucks, we can just blame it on, well, we were trying to match the food. But no, but it's like, there's, I guess the trend of new beer every month is tough because we don't have a ton of space to store a bunch of new beer. Today I moved about 30 kegs into a storage area because we're just running out of space. But, you know, it wasn't one brand, it was several brands just to kind of make room for the next thing that we're doing. But beer's supposed to be fun. And so I don't know that I take it that serious that there's not a no. I mean, we just want to make clean beer. I think that's the biggest thing. Let's make clean beer.
So you got a lot of love and you try to show it all at some point or another.
Yeah, I think so.
Do you remember your first drink?
Oh man, yeah. I was underage and my dad was drinking a Bud Light and we were at Jellystone Park and which is a campground in Angola, Indiana. And I was talking crap about whatever he was doing. He's like, whatever, here, have this beer. And I crushed it. I was 12. And his friends laugh at him because they're like, oh, he's obviously done it before, but I had not. But he challenged me, and I was like, oh, I got this. It tasted like shit. I didn't like it. But because he said what he said, I was like, I'm crushing this whole beer. So, yeah, I was pretty young, but, I mean, it wasn't like a all-the-time thing at 12.
Well, you were from Defiance, Ohio, so I guess you're going to have a little defiant attitude when challenged.
That's why my mom moved me out.
What about your worst drink?
Something with Negroni in it, I'm sure. Yeah, something I probably homebrewed, probably. I can remember there were times where I'm like, well, it's 6% though. You spent all that time.
Why waste?
That's right.
Okay, so last up is a bucket list drinking companion. Who's somebody that you haven't had a beer with, but you'd love to, alive or dead?
I thought about that a lot. And I don't know that there's a individual that I think about needing to spend time with. My mom doesn't drink. I have one picture with her holding a 4-ounce taster. And she said, don't you dare post that picture. And so I'd love to just sit down. And by the way, she crushed it. And she said, well, that's why I don't drink, because I drink it too fast and too. So I would love to sit down with my mom without all the stuff that is around alcohol regarding our background or whatever, and just have a beer with my mom and have her truly enjoy it, find something that she likes, and then, and be on that level with her. And not that we're not close or anything like that, but she won't drink with me. So if I were to pick, I'd pick a beer with my mom.
Yeah, it's nice. It's a good magic wand moment. Well, thanks for sharing your story, Edwin, and the story of City Built. I really appreciate what you guys are doing. Thanks for putting, the hospitality, the warm hospitality out there in the world and continuing on through these crazy times. I'm really, really glad you guys are doing it. And just want to thank you for spending time with us today too.
Hey man, thank you so much for taking time to talk to me and shine your light on City Built. I appreciate that.
Yeah, right on. I hope to get together soon and have some of your Puerto Rican tacos amongst everything else.
Sweet.
Cheers, brother.
Take care. Later.
Thanks for listening and sharing while supporting Michigan breweries and craft beer everywhere. The Michigan Brewers Guild was formed in 1997 with its first summer beer festival taking place in July of 1998. Its now 5 annual festivals are dedicated exclusively to Michigan beer brewed by more than 270 member breweries. The Michigan Brewers Guild exists to promote and protect the passionate Michigan beer industry in every way possible. To learn more, visit us at mibeer.com or say hello on one of our social media pages, as we love hearing from you. From coast to coast, from far and near, let's drink Michigan beer.
Let's drink